up where we left off here in activity 325, where we were exploring these different security frameworks um, and looking at some of those issues that we might have doing that pen testing. We are going to be starting on our compromise, or that third phase of our ethical hacking. Now, as a reminder, businesses do this ethical hacking to make sure that we are understanding what that overall network structure looks like, how, and we're going to scan the different services and those applications that we have, figuring out where some of those vulnerabilities are, and exposing those things, and then going in lastly and remediating. So we went through that. First video goes through the reconnaissance and scanning, where you were adding notes, and then we have compromise and remediation as a couple of other steps that we need to go through. So we are going to be looking at this metasploit, and that is us going into that framework to perform these different pen tests to help them develop those exploits, build some tests so we can assess those weaknesses and vulnerabilities that we have in an individual system or as a network overall. It's really, really powerful, and it should only be, used in a trusted and disciplined manner with this stuff. Okay, so we're going to be using the command line, a web interface, and a console. Those are opportunities there, but we are just going to be using the console here in step 29 when we're going through our compromise section. So we are in target Windows 01. You are going to go in and launch PowerShell, that Windows PowerShell, and then we're going to go in and type and start the database that Metasploit uses. So these are just going to be those little commands that we have. Now, I do want you to make sure that you are having your notes sheet out for this 3.2 important references there, so we can follow along with and add some different notes to keep us in check. Whoopsies. To keep us reminding ourselves, what are we doing here? Because again, you're going to be using all of those notes here again. Okay, let me pause here for a second so I get organized. Here we go. You should have some notes on how to do the reconnaissance phase, our scanning phase, and now we're going to go into compromise. Okay, so here in target Windows 01, we're going to launch PowerShell, and then we're going to type the following into the database and kind of get Metasploit here started. So I'm going to type in msfdb start, and it might take a little bit to load here. And as that's happening, we can go in and kind of type in this information here. So I'm going to throw in that, and it is taking a while, but that's okay. For my compromise section, I'm just going to go through and put in a couple of notes here. So step 1, we're going to open PowerShell, type the following. Okay, so I am going to go in and type msfdb start and msf console. Okay, so that's going to go in and start that Metasploit type of stuff. So I'm back here. Now I can type msf console, press enter there. It's going to take a couple of minutes to load, and we're going to be all right with that. So after the message shows up, and we are going to ignore some of those security warnings that are also going to follow, then we're going to start opening up and do some of this pen testing. So I'm going to wait a minute for this to get loaded, and then we will get moving. All right, Metasploit has loaded for me. We can see that it kind of looks a little bit weird, but now we are in that MSF in that system. Okay, now here in step number 31, we are needing to open up our quick scan plus report. So hopefully you went in and you had thrown that into your cybersecurity folder. So I'm back into cybersecurity 325 materials, and I am wanting that pump PLC quick scan plus. I'm going to get that all opened up here. Throw that off to the side. And we are wanting to list and look at that first open port, and that is going to be our port 21 TCP, and that's running on our FTP service. Now, what we need to keep track of is what's that version of the service, and then you can see here in that first line, it's the Pro FTPD 135. All right, so we're gonna kind of keep that in our mind here as I go back into the system. And now that I am in my PowerShell, I will type in this search pro FTPD. Again, that version of what we had seen was an open port. Okay, so I'm going to type in search pro FTPD. That's what I discovered there in port 21. And it's building that database. Okay, and it is searching for that different plugin, looks at all of our descriptions here, and we can find the version that is used by Pump PLC. Now, what we're going to want to do, and this is where that copy and paste is going to be really, really helpful. We are finding the version that is used by Pump PLC. So we're going to use the full name, including the path, to specify the exploit. Now it tells us that here, but we can go in and look at the Pro FTP 135, right? Looking at that version stuff there. We've got our command execution. So that's going to be the one that we have. So I'm going to go in, and instead of typing that in, I'm going to copy. And then I'm going to paste this into my system. And I've got that there. If I press enter, what do I observe? Okay, so now it's changing. To the prompt, it is an MSF exploit, and then that specific exploit name that we just copy and pasted in there. Okay, so as we are doing these different penetration system tests for all of these vulnerabilities, we need to know that this is going to be something that is active. Okay. All right, and so now we've got that exploit running. We are going to begin to pen test the Pump PLC. We are going to type in show options. This will show the options you need to set for this exploit. You need to set the RHOST to Pump PLC's IP address and the site path to a directory that we can be modified or written to. Now, this is kind of tough to see. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make that just a little bit bigger. And if we see there our MSF exploit, I'm going to type in options, and these are the different options that I have. So I've got my exploit target, my ID, all of those different things there. So I'm just going to look and take a peek at what those options are. Okay, then we're going to go in and set the target remote host and its file path. So I'm going to try to select both of those. Actually, I'm going to set that RH, copy, paste. And then I'm going to copy and paste this second one in there as well. Okay, so we have set that remote host and the file path and where we want these things to be. Now we're going to launch the exploit. So this Metasploit has a configuration for this specific vulnerability that we have. And when we are launching the exploit that is connected to it, we are going to be using that vulnerable or that bad application to create that workaround into our remote host. So if it's successful, the system is weak and the vulnerable is due for that upgrade and that service, and then that's meaning that we have access into the system. So this is that backdoor workaround that we are hopefully trying to avoid, but we'll see what happens here. So I've got this MSF exploit, yada, 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 and now let's just type in exploit. And we should see what's happening here. So the command shell opens and it displays the following information. Just double check that it matches. And it should. The command shell session 1 opened. It's executing a payload. Okay, we are sending some commands to that FTP server. All right, so my output looked the exact same as this output here when we are running the exploit. So what does this mean for us? Now it means that, and we can read this here, because we were able to find that port that is running, we were able to connect to that FTP or that vulnerable service, it delivered some files, okay? It delivered that payload. We were executing some of those things. And whenever you are using that payload, it gained access to that specific host. started that random shell session that was opened, and now it's waiting for some of these other commands that we have. Okay. So we want to learn a little bit more about the identity of the machine here. Let's type in who am I? And the user is saying www data. So this is confirming that we are in the hacked environment and we're that web server. That's that www data. And so if we issue that ls command, it's going to give us all of the files that we have access to. So chat, this PHP file, Drupal, payroll app. Ooh, that doesn't seem great. And then this admin type of thing. So we can also be looking and using the different commands for our host name. We've already used that, or that if config. So maybe I want to type in host name and see what that takes me. That's pump PLC. So we know that we're in pump PLC, not in the way that we want to be, right? We didn't connect through our connections folder, put in that username or put in that password and stuff that we've done many, many times before. I'm in pump PLC through my PowerShell because there is that big vulnerability there. Obviously, that needs to be fixed. And maybe I'm going to type in this if config in there as well, and then a whole lot of information is looking at this. Okay, verify where the computer is located on by the host name and IP address. So let's try to type this in here. We're going to use both of those. Let me copy and paste. Systems. I just need to do it. All right, so looking at what do we see here, we know that it is pump PLC, and then what that IP address is 10205. Okay, that is obviously that ETH0, and we saw that up there as well. That's giving us a lot of information. Okay, so we are going to confirm that access. We are going to cat our password file that contains a list of all users on Pump PLC. Okay, finding the sensitive user information confirms that you were able to access the system through that backdoor created by the exploit. So we are doing that pen testing right now. We are hopefully going to go in and confirm that major vulnerability that we have. So back into my PowerShell, I go, and we are going to be putting in that cat, etc. password. Okay, that cat, etc. password. So I typed in this cat, etc. password, looking at all of those different type of users and those files that we have. That's obviously going to be a major thing. Now, in step 39, it says, what are the effects of launching an exploit? So when we launched and created that backdoor shell, we were able to go in and execute and install some random arbitrary code that gave us a lot of permissions. Okay, that gave us those root permissions. Something that we don't, that's definitely going to be that vulnerability. And what are the ethical consequences and responsibilities for testing this vulnerability? Well, because we're testing it effectively, we are compromising that target host in a way that the tester has complete access to the data that they shouldn't have maybe complete access to, and that individual has the opportunity, and hopefully not an opportunity, to violate and to shut down some of that security in different ways. So we need to make sure that as stakeholders, when we're testing that vulnerability in our companies, we are given that and granting all of those different changes that we have respectfully, and we're not causing more issues with the access that we might have. So here in step number 40, we're going to quit that Metasploit here when we went in and created that stuff. So let me click on Control C, maybe a couple of times here. All right, abort session, Y, and we want to exit that. And if we need to terminate again, we're going to type in Y. Yes. All right, now we're back to our normal PowerShell there. Okay, so let's write in some notes, some things that we did here in our remediation system or our step in that process. So when we were going into our compromise, when we were going in and doing that, we were needing to search for those exploits. So I'm going to open up PowerShell. We typed in our start and that console, and then we need to go in and search for the exploit. And how we do that is type in, after we're in that MSF, we're going to search that pro FTPD. Again, that was that file, or the version that we were needing to look at when we went back in and looked at this little Zen map. That pro FTP is where we were finding that stuff. And then step 3, I am going to use the exploit for your version, and that is MSF use exploit Unix. Going back up here, maybe we just want to go in and copy and paste this, right? Copy. All right, I can handle that. Type show options. Bold. And then we're going to set up our configuration details there. So that is this host stuff. I'm going to paste that in there. And then we are wanting to launch our exploit by copying and pasting using that. Okay, so we can verify. Change that back to Arial. Woo. Those different exploits there. Okay, that is how we go through our compromising system. Okay, so now our last step here is looking at our remediation. Okay, we are needing to look at those IP tables commands in our notebook. You can kind of answer some of those things, but now what we're doing here in Target Windows 01, again, we are going to connect to our pump PLC. So I'm going into connections here. And so we saw a lot of those problems when we were doing that compromising stuff. We had that exploit, right? We were able to get into pump PLC through our PowerShell. Not something that we want to do. So I'm going to type in vagrant, and we are going to implement those IP table rules. If you need a little bit of assistance on that, you can go in and look at those notes that we had here too. These IP tables are listing those inbound rules, what we are going to allow, all of that stuff. So we're wanting to take a look and clean up our pump PLC. So now I'm into Vagrant. We're going to implement those IP table rules to mitigate the pro FTPD exploit. Do not forget to use our sudo and confirm and save your changes. Okay, so what are these IP table rules to mitigate that exploit? So let's go in and take a look at our notes right now and see, gosh, what makes the most sense. So we were listing out all of those rules. I'm going to copy and paste that. I want to list out the rules that I do have there right now. Okay, so I'm going to send the text to lab. We see that we are accepting a lot of different stuff from anywhere to anywhere. Okay, that's going to be something that we are thinking. Now we got to clear that stuff. It's always good to be listing things out, but now let's clear these rules. Whoops. Okay, so we're going to clear those different rules. We're going to flush all of those inbound rules that we have, and we're wanting to make sure that we put in that rule for pro FTP. Okay. Um, so let's go back into our pump PLC, and we are wanting to allow some things. We are wanting to allow FTP from our pump monitor. So we're going to be kind of diving into, we don't care about SSH right now. We're only going to be looking at that FTP type of stuff. And then we can go in and figure out how are we going to make those rules and how are we going to make those changes into our system so we can't FTP all random like we did before. So I'm going to go in and allow that SSH to work on our host from target Windows 01. I'm going to go in and paste that into that system. And the other thing that we're only wanting to do is allow our FTP from our pump monitor. So those are the only things that we are going to be connecting when we're here in pump PLC. When I'm in pump PLC, I'm not going to get random crap from other people. So then I'm going to put in this IP tables again to accept that from the IP address of our pump monitor. Okay, so back in the system, paste that in there. Booyah. Okay, awesome. Let's list out these inbound rules again, just to see maybe what changes have been made. So we can see that our sources are going to be a lot different. We are TCPing that secure sign-on, okay, awesome. But now we are only going to be accepting this from our FTP from 10206, and that's exactly what we are wanting to have. Now, in case we want to do this, allow FTP and SSH from other ports at random, because if traffic gets too heavy in our specific FTP port, then we want to still be able to get those files routing from different ports. So I'm going to throw that in there as well. All stuff that we did before. Right click, press enter, and then the last one. Anything else? This is really important. If it is not explicitly stating that it is allowed, we are going to block that traffic, and that's what was missing before. So I'm going to send that text to lab, send and paste, right click, booyah, and let's list this stuff out again, and let's see what we got going on. You want to make sure that you've got that sudo or that super users stuff in there as we are going in and making these changes. Okay, so that is listing out what our drop is going to be. Let's save our stuff. After we go in and block all of that other traffic, it's going to take a little bit. It's still thinking. So perfect. We got our sources, those destinations, and any other type of stuff. If it's related and it is established before, then we're going to allow that. Okay, so now let's go in and save these different rules that we have. Perfect. It's saved, it is completed, and we are set to go. Okay, so that was going through those IP table rules. Again, we wanted to make sure that we were using that sudo commands and we're saving our stuff. So now we need to go back in and verify that we have addressed that vulnerability and everything is okay. So that is us going in back into kind of doing some of those steps from before in our compromise back in PowerShell. So I'm going to close out of Pump PLC. I'm going to close that session. Let's jump back into PowerShell here and make sure that we are not able to exploit that information like we were able to do before. So I'm going to go back into my important reference information here, and this is where I'm going to type in that, go through those steps one more time. All right, so I just went through those compromise steps again. I'm making sure that I had went through that MSFDB start, the console. I wanted to search for that Pro FTPD. Went through all of those things and looking at that show options section. Okay, so I was wanting to look at and put in those other setting, the site path and the R host and all that stuff, and then I wanted to exploit it. Now I had an error. I did not. The exploit failed. Okay, so that is no session was created, that it was timed out, it wasn't able to work. So I went through that remediation process correctly. You want to make sure that you do this to make sure that your remediation steps actually worked. Okay, so really, really important that we go in and do that. So now let's kind of write down some of these remediation steps just to make sure that we have that on like in our mind here. So we are needing to connections pump PLC using that vagrant and vagrant passwords, and then use those IP tables. You gotta look above. That's our 324 work. We need to use those sudo or those super user do. Looking at those input, seeing what was going on, and then follow the steps from 324. Okay. Those rules that we have for remediation, those are going to be all of these steps that we have in 324. So just make sure that you go through that and you are going to be okay. All right. So make sure that you have notes for reconnaissance scanning, compromise, remediation. Say look at 324 there to kind of help you out. So that is our important reference information. Make sure that you have this filled out, get it turned in when you are done, and then we're going to get ready to go with our 326 project.